Capita envisions a future in which children and families can flourish. By prioritizing our youngest children, their families, and their communities, we have the potential to radically transform the fabric of our societies for the long term. In this series of Capita in Conversation, we talk to interviewees from around the world to hear their stories, knowledge, wisdom, and ideas on how to create child and family flourishing. In this episode, Capita's Chief Strategy Officer, Cassidy, interviews Play Africa's Managing Director, Rongedzayi Fambasayi, about the role of cities in protecting child rights, creativity in tackling the climate crisis, governance for child-centered climate action across Africa, and more.
Welcome to this conversation from Capita. I'm Cassidy. I'm Director of Public Engagement and Strategic Communications. And today I'm delighted to chat to Rongedzayi Fambasayi, who is the Managing Director of Play Africa, an award-winning interactive children's museum based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Rongedzayi is a children's rights lawyer by training. He's also currently an independent external expert in the working group on children's rights and climate change of the African Union's Committee of Experts on the rights and welfare of the child. And today we're going to focus predominantly on his work, thinking about children's rights, the environment and climate, particularly in cities across the African continent. Rongedzayi, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Carol, and thank you so much for having me today and for the kind introductions. And may I just, jump and point out that, whilst I have so many portfolios, in this conversation, I'll strictly speak in my own capacity, but in the capacity of some of the offices that I hold. Thank you.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so let's kick off with my first question, which was, what inspired you in the first place to focus your work on children's rights?
Yes, I've always wanted to become a human rights lawyer because I'm passionate about social justice. I'm passionate about equality. I'm passionate about, finding ways to remedy wrongs that are done by government and other perpetrators. And along the way in my work, I grew a passion and a like for children's rights for one reason and two reasons. The first one is that social justice and the legal standing of children is that children doesn't have a voice. They don't have a voice, and they require people to really stand up for them. Because when you look at the social status in Africa, the legal status in Africa, children really are considered to be minors, and they cannot, represent themselves in courts. They cannot represent themselves even in any forum, even in the government and in governance of their cities. Then the second one is that, growing up, I've seen some of my colleagues as a young boy, going through the justice system and experiencing, the injustices of the justice system. So, I then realized that being a human rights lawyer, and specifically children's rights, it's something that can transform someone's life, specifically children. And I'm strongly a believer that hope lies in our children. And in order for us to really build children, we need to stand up for them. We need to be there for them. We need to create spaces for them. And we need to have champions in spaces where adults are speaking, where we can have people talking about the rights of children and also creating more spaces for children to participate and to engage with governments and other public officials.
Thank you. I think I read somewhere as well that you think that when you're talking about making cities, and as I think about cities now, making them child friendly doesn't go far enough. Could you explain that a bit more?
Yes. The concept of child-friendly seating is quite an interesting and established concept. It has been used for over 3 decades, and within the 3 decades, it has done tremendous work. But, we need to give recognition to the fact that when you're dealing with governments, when you're dealing with duty bearers, what makes them accountable is not fluffy words, is not friendliness, but rather you need to have concrete laws and policies that speaks to what they ought to do. They need to invest in the children's rights. They need to invest in education. They need to invest in protection of children from online sexual exploitation and any other ills that normally come from, adults. So the discussion of, really making cities friendly, I believe that it does not go enough. And I think also it's not a good commitment on the part of us adults and part of government officials and part of really all the duty bearers. And I'll give you an example why I strongly feel that, child friendliness is not enough. When people talk about gender equality, they don't talk about friendliness when it relates to women's rights, when they, talk about the need to ensure that women have equal opportunities. And only friendliness comes when people talk about children as a group, that they need to create more friendly spaces, more friendly laws, more friendly policies. Yet there is a need to create more responsive, accountable laws and policies. So, and I believe that when we look at it from a more responsive law and policy strategy or angle, it helps us to really understand that child friendliness has been used, but we need to change how we look at things. We need to change how we look at our cities and policies and structures and governance to ensure that we are more serious, more committed, and accountable to children themselves. So another critical component is that it is difficult for children to really take governments to account. When governments are talking about friendliness, you can't take a city to court because they failed to become friendly. But you can take a city to court when they failed to stick to their constitutional or legislative obligation, which is a binding and an enforceable law that can be used by children to keep their governments to account. And the other example that I might also then give in relation to friendliness is that if you have a city that is child friendly and in relation to climate change, it's just friendly, it's difficult for children to really, take the city to account and say, we want you to frame your policies and laws thinking about the intergenerational dialogue that is between the present generation and the next generation. But if there are laws and policies in place, it helps children as themselves, as bearers of rights, to really say, look, this is our right, this is what needs to be done, and let's do it, let's take governments to account. So it's a matter in the discussion of accountability that, I believe friendliness fails to tackle and to integrate in what we need to do. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And so sticking to kind of the challenges of cities, so by 2100, 5 of the 10 largest cities in the world will be in sub-Saharan Africa, others in South Asia. What are some of the biggest challenges you think that children living in those cities face?
Yeah, the challenges that children are facing now are quite huge. And it is said that, in some respects, in sub-Saharan Africa, governments fail to really take action in concrete action for that matter. And the challenges currently that we see are around access to, urban services, access to water, access to health services, access to housing itself. That is why you'd see in many cities in sub-Saharan Africa and sometimes in South Asia, you have many children living in slums. And so if they're living in slums, for instance, if they're girls, they don't have access to adequate water, which affects their dignity. They don't have access to enough, health facilities for the protection of their sanitary needs as girls as they are growing up, and also their sexual and reproductive health needs. And these issues are happening now across the African continent. You talk of Zimbabwe, you talk of South Africa, you talk of Kenya, you talk of, some of the slums in Ghana. These are the things that are happening. And as cities are growing, as just indicated that in by 2100, these challenges are going to be bigger. I cannot predict how big they are going to be, but considering the challenge that we're already facing in relation to climate crisis, one can predict that even the temperatures in cities is going to rise tremendously. Access to water in cities is going to be a problem. And if it's a problem for everyone else, then for children who are young, in need of protection, in need of care, then it means that it's going to increase, it's going to be exacerbated by how we look and what we see. Then the other challenge that might then result in these challenges of urbanization in sub-Saharan Africa, which urbanization is not quite structured, is not coordinated, is that you tend to have children that are living in communities without schools, and they walk long distances to go and access those schools. So these challenges are quite huge now, and they are going to be much more prominent and devastating in the years to come. I cannot enumerate all the challenges that will happen in 2100, but what we see now, the challenge that we have now with environmental and ecological degradation, the challenges are going to be quite huge unless if governments and cities are going to make practical and concrete measures to ensure that cities are built in a structured manner. Governance is taking into account the need of future generations, because that's an important group to protect as we speak now.
That's great. And actually, thinking about that, I wondered what do you think that cities should be doing more? How should they be doing more to protect children? And particularly, should policies be coming more from government, from city? What role does civil society play?
So in relation to the role that cities should play and cities can play, is that the first point of call is that cities are the level of government closest to children. And different countries have, multi-level governance. And then I will speak in respect of South Africa, where I'm based. That you have the local government, which are municipalities, which are cities. And you have the provincial government, and you have the national government. And because national government make laws that impact the entire government structure, but you then realize that where these children are living within cities, and in terms of the constitutional obligations, the municipalities and local government have the mandate to protect people that are within their communities. And that mandate extends to the need to ensure that the community is safe from environmental degradation and environmental disaster. So cities have a role to play. It might be different with, different nations, different states, because of how they structure their laws and policies. But I strongly believe that child rights implementation really happens at the local level. It happens where the children are. It happens at the city level. There is, of course, a situation where cities might say we don't have the budgets, we don't have the mandate to really interfere into issues around children and protection of children. And I think that is only merely an excuse. The question of should laws and policies emanate from national government and cities, I believe that they should emanate from national government as well as cities. So there are areas that the national government has a mandate to regulate, which could include then the broader spectrum of climate action, financing, and so forth. But cities have a role to play then to ensure the protection of children, but the implementation of national laws that are put in by the national government. And when you look at it, you then understand that everyone involved, including civil society, they have a role to play. The city has a role to play, civil society has a role to play. And part of what civil society should and can do is to make sure that they are working around, creating of evidence around the protection of children, climate action, and what the cities should do, keeping the cities to account, getting to participate in law making and in budget making at the city level. But more importantly, putting cities to account and pushing for cities to protect children. And when we talk of civil society, we also take into account that part of civil society are child rights organizations. And these child rights organizations are critical to create more spaces for children to participate in the governance of their city. You cannot talk of a city that caters for children, but exclude children from the governance and the formulation of laws and policies and budget within that city. And civil society plays a very critical role to bring children together, getting resources and supporting the participation of children to ensure that children are part of the community and creating safe spaces for children, like making sure that there are parks that are safe for children, ensuring that public malls are safe for children, and ensuring that everything relating to the city is child-friendly and accommodates children. And I repeat by saying child-friendly because that's the word that people are used to. But there's the need to go beyond that and making sure that you keep governments and cities to account for the protection of children. And I believe, in closing on this part, that cities have a critical role to play, even though cities are not part of international law, but they have a duty to also implement laws that are, protecting children at the international level or at the regional level. They can bring it down and make a choice to implement those.
And now looking at the broader climate crisis, and obviously this week next week we've got COP kicking off the UN conferences. So the climate crisis is a child's right crisis. That's something that UNICEF talk about a lot in their work. Why do you think that children are not then more at the centre of climate action?
Yes, the challenge of the climate crisis is that it appears that it has caught everyone, without people being prepared. What you see happening, I'll speak for Sub-Saharan Africa. What you see happening across Sub-Saharan Africa is that governments are now trying to deal with the climate crisis, and the crisis is already here. And when you look at the climate crisis being dealt by governments, it gives you the impression and a clear picture that it is a discussion of who has the authority or the political muscle to be engaged. So look at COP27. The majority of the participants are government ministers and presidents and high-level personalities and experts, and these are adults. And look at how even the Conference of Parties itself is structured. It's structured with only adults. It's only recently that the UN tried to then include in young people. So the basis of the exclusion of young people and children from the center of climate action is as a result of the status of children across many states and also globally, that children are treated as young, as minors. They don't have a voice. They can't contribute anything. Politically, they don't have a muscle. They have no right to vote. So they can't really be engaged in, issues that are of high level. But recently, we have noticed that there is a radical move by, climate activists. We applaud them, and we always, ululate when they are, doing protests and strikes. This is what we need. This is what has been happening and is pushing more children towards becoming climate activists and towards climate action, across the African continent, but also globally. And the challenges lies in how adults, all of us, have been, looking at children and how we view children. But there's hope and confidence that, in COP27, I was observing recently that more organizations across Africa, they are going to be bringing children together, and they are going to be having sessions where children are going to speak about what they want, what they expect from governments, what governments should do now, and what governments should do in the future, and particularly investing in the climate crisis and climate action. I'll close by pointing out that part of the challenge, of course, because it's a government issue, is that if you look at the African continent now, as far as I know, it's only one state, which is Kenya, that has a climate change law. South Africa is busy working on one currently as we speak. But within the law that the South African government is working, you can only see that children are mentioned once in that entire law or entire act or entire bill, which then gives you an impression and a message that really children are not mainstreamed by governments. And there's the need to continuously push from all angles, from civil society, from having children, or people in the academia, to support children and be there for children, and continuously push to ensure that the voices of children become much more louder and louder and louder and louder until something has been done.
And how do you think we could be more creative in how we tackle the climate crisis, particularly in relation to children?
The climate crisis is a problem that we have. And without being a prophet of doom, there's a possibility that we might have the crisis for some time, unless something is done by governments. And I believe that, the creativity lies in, appreciating that the climate crisis needs to be brought down to children, for children to understand what the climate crisis is, what climate change is. And I'll make a confession that, when I was going through early childhood in my day, there was no talk about global warming or, climate change or the climate crisis, because it was not there. Yet, had it been that governments were deliberate and education systems were deliberate to be creative enough to bring the conversation of climate change awareness and literacy from early childhood learning, that would have, been set all of us for success. And what we are doing at Play Africa is to then tap into the creativity and being innovative about how to bring the conversation of the climate crisis to children. And we have curriculum and activities that are set for early childhood learners, but also we capacitate early childhood educators for them to entrench climate change awareness into children from an early age. So it's important for children to play around and to know what it means to have climate change, what is global warming, what is really happening, because a child today that is 8 years, in 10 years they'll be 80, they'll be an adult. A child that is 10 years now, in 10 years they'll be 20 years, they'll be an adult with the right to vote. And some of them in the next 15, 20 years, they'll be the decision makers. And if we inculcate and entrench the understanding in them to do climate mitigation, adaptation from a young age, we can transform the world as we know it now to a world that can be a world that is good for all of us. So I believe that the innovativeness may lie in really getting towards children. Of course, we'll continue the fight of pushing governments to invest in early childhood, but more specifically around issues of climate change, governments to invest in the climate crisis to ensure that all those that are working in different sectors, they will do what they ought to do robustly. For instance, we have challenges of water supply across the African continent, and this is something that governments need to be creative, even issues around energy and the use of coal. There is the need for governments to invest and understand that it is best for governments, it is best for children, it is best for the next generation to, make robust and concrete action and measures to ensure that we protect the current generation, but children at the same time.
Thank you. And just sort of to finish off, really, I wanted to ask you a more personal question. Is sort of what's one project you've dreamed of doing but haven't started yet?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the projects that I have dreamt of doing that I haven't started yet, and I need to start as soon as possible, is writing a book around children's rights and climate change and environmental governance on the African continent. And I say so because that's an advocacy tool that can be used by civil society, child rights organizations, that can also be used by governments, and that can be used by children in the academia, but also a useful tool for even some of the African Union organs. And I think the importance of that project for me is that it magnifies the problem and the challenge, but at the same time, it helps us to find solutions, because many of the solutions we need, they lie in research, and evidence-based research is what will help us to find concrete solutions, durable solutions, sustainable solutions for the future. So this is one of my projects, and I think I should by next year start working on it to ensure that, we address the climate crisis and, contribute in a way that everyone else can contribute.
Rongedzayi, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thanks, everyone.
Each episode of Capita in Conversation is produced by Michael Bettis and is available by podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as capita.org.